Dune.
The real-time strategy game. A game type where you make your moves as well as your opponents at the same time, hence real time. There may have been other attempts at creating that type of game, but this game was definitely the foundation for the RTSs as we know them later on and even in modern time. As we probably gathered from the introduction, the objective of Dune 2 is to basically conquer the planet and produce spice for the Emperor. Spice is an interesting substance that if you are exposed to it for prolonged periods of time, it will enhance your psychic powers, which is super relevant in the game Dune, which is not an RTS but an adventure action-ish game. But let us get into Dune 2. You have the choice of playing one of three houses: House Atreides, House Orders, and House Harkonnen. Harkonnen pronunciation up to you. And each have their different strengths and weaknesses. On a unity unit base, Atreides are supposed to be the average unit, whereas Orders is slightly weaker and Harkonnen is slightly stronger. Depending on which house you select, you'll have a mentat or guide that will give you mission briefings. And for the first mission, the briefings are roughly identical. Basically, all three campaigns are more or less the same. The opposition will be different depending on the house you play. The technology you'll have available will be different. It's unique later on, much later on, between the individual houses, but the rank and file units will be the same across the board, with the properties I mentioned before in mind. Atreides being the medium, or just Orders being slightly weaker, and Harkonnen being slightly stronger. In the case of the very first mission, we are asked to build a refinery and gather 1,000 credits worth of spice, which is actually incorrect. The objective is to get to 1,000 credits worth of spice, so you actually have to harvest slightly less than is implied. For the base building, you can and should build concrete foundation to place your structures on. It can be a bit finicky, especially later on in the game, but it reduces the amount of wear and tear the environment causes on structures, and if you decide to place a structure on a rock foundation instead of concrete foundation, you will incur a 50% hit point hit to that building, which of course has to be repaired up, which effectively means that you are paying extra for the same building. And of course, if you place a set building in while the base is under attack, it is extremely vulnerable and can be taken out relatively quickly depending on the building in question. Wind Trap, the first one to be built, is basically your power unit. It provides power and water that is essential for running the base. But of course, we can't harvest spice without a harvester, so we need to set up the necessary concrete slabs in order to build the refinery. The other units are randomly attacking. Infantry units can damage buildings by running into them and capture certain buildings, but it can be a bit hit and miss. Mainly they'll just suicide and damage the buildings. So, refinery time.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Switching to the order side, I will showcase just exactly what happens to a building when you place it without putting the concrete foundation. You can see it has half the hit points, which has to be prepared up, which is another 100 credits. So basically, instead of costing 400 credits, the building will suddenly cost 500 credits.
Yes, sir.
It is an option you have available if you want to, but I don't like placing buildings like that. By the way, because the first mission is basically identical for all three houses, I have made one amalgamation of the first mission, taking a bit from each house gameplay.
Acknowledged. 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 Yes, sir.
Just going around looking for units to fill the holes.
Yes, sir.
Enemy unit destroyed.
And for the last part of the first mission, I will be switching to Harkonnen.
Yes, sir.
As you can probably see, they have quads, which are armored four-wheelers, basically, or slightly armored four-wheelers. They got a bit more firepower than the trike,
Destroyed.
and it's a bit more durable. Of course, because we only need 60 credits, there's no reason to wait for the harvester to get completely filled before we send it back. And just to showcase, I will show you the debriefing of each of the different houses. They're treated as being the noble guys. They are very, very appreciative and all that good stuff, and orders being very business-like. They are very business-like in their response to you. And of course, Harkonnen being outright evil. They are your mentor is treating you like you are his servant, which you probably are. After each mission, you get a score, which is something we take for granted in RTS games, but of course, this being one of the first, if not the first, real RTS, this was a big thing. And as you will find, there's a slight difference in score between the three houses, but that's mainly due to shooting a unit more or less. And finally, House Harkonnen's score, which is going to be identical to the Atreida score. It's not because I like to see my own name on a high score list, but Whatever, I just want to showcase all three at the same time without making a 60-minute video. So, doing a mission 2 on Harkonnen, somewhat condensed, just to showcase moving a bit further on without having to necessarily play halfway through the game or potentially spoil anything. But while the second mission is playing, I will be talking about this game in general. One thing to note is that we are supposed to be gathering 2,700 credits worth of spice. Just remember that. So,
Yes,
Dune
sir.
2,
Acknowledged.
perhaps the only true RTS that was ever released for the Amiga. I
sir.
haven't played
Acknowledged.
every single Amiga game under the sun, of course, so I wouldn't know whether others
Acknowledged.
exist out there. But
Acknowledged.
as an RTS, you can tell this is a first of its kind. It has all the foundations that we know from later games with base building and production of units, and go out and beat your enemy senseless using various different unit types with various different levels of technology, gathering resources and all that stuff. For something like unit control, you have to manually click every single unit and give them one order. There's no drag selection. And even though you can select a unit and click, there's also thankfully a keyboard shortcut for most options. Building, moving, all that stuff.
Construction complete.
From a graphical point of view, this game is very nice to look at, to be honest. I like the detail level of the individual structures and buildings. I was about to say units.
Construction complete.
You have a good feeling of being on some barren world that you're fighting over, and you can easily identify any unit, friendly or enemy. And from a graphical point of view, the game definitely delivers. What music there is definitely much more of an ambient track than anything else. It is considered to be music, but it is very, very subtle and doesn't really change much over the duration of a game. The sound design, the unit acknowledgements, the game guides voiceover, which is
Yes, sir.
the Harkonnen guide voiceover thing, by the way.
Acknowledged.
It's all very well done. The sound effects are satisfying. When something blows up, you can tell it blows up. The game can be a bit noisy from time to time, especially when you have several heavy tubers firing at the same time. But because it sounds as good as it does, it's hard to complain. The gameplay itself, I mean, it is an RTS. If you don't like RTS, then if you don't like RTSs, I should say, you will probably not find this game even remotely enjoyable or exciting or interesting. But for those who may enjoy RTSs, it's an interesting thing to have a look at and play. The game that ultimately was the foundation for the modern RTS. The AI can be a bit finicky. It's like titled the most brilliant AI. Enemies can get extremely close to your base before your units respond to them, and it can be very, very awkward having to manually click attack in order to defend your base. Later on, when you start getting turrets and missile turrets, they seem to respond a lot quicker to enemies' presence, and once they start engaging, your units will wake up and say, "Huh, there's something to shoot at." So in that regard, it is not too bad. It's a bit annoying early on in the game, but it sorts itself out. Well, the early game units are a bit bland, and not super exciting. Later on, you start getting access to things like tanks and more powerful tanks and missile tanks, which is basically a long-range unit. As stated earlier, each house has access to unique technology, and they all play in different ways and have different strengths and weaknesses, but by and large, has to be mentioned, House Harkonnen pulled the long straw, I think. By and large, House Harkonnen is the stronger house and possibly the more enjoyable to play. Earlier I mentioned that I had to pay attention to the fact that we had to harvest 2700 credits. Once we blow up the enemy base, that will also complete the mission. One thing that has to be mentioned before I forget is the famous, infamous sandworms, which are native to Dune. They will move around on the sand, are virtually indestructible, and like to munch on large units, and they seem to have a special taste for player-controlled fall harvesters. All in all, as a whole package, Dune 2 is a very, very good game. Plenty to do, plenty to play, a challenge that can be decent to brutal depending on skill level, and if you have any interest in RTS games at all, it's definitely worth a look. And on that note, I will say thanks for watching, take care, see you next time, bye bye for now.